Hi there, my name is Marley and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today I'm doing my December wrap-up, so talking about all the books I read in the month of December, and I also want to talk about some of my 2022 stats. I haven't talked about them in any other video yet, but I thought it'd be fun to look back on my stats for the year of 2022 now that we're in the new year. But first off, let's see on Goodreads. So in 2022, I did manage to read 114 books, and my technical goal was 100, so I did beat that. And then I made a sort of sub goal that I wanted to read 100 novels because I had read a few different manga in the year, and I did manage to complete that. I ended up reading 100 novels and then 14 manga, which made the total 114. And according to Storygraph, that equaled out to 39,606 pages. And then on Storygraph, they also show you a breakdown of the moods of the books you read. So I read mostly dark, mysterious, tense, and adventurous books, which is not too surprising considering I mostly read thrillers and fantasy. For the pace, 49% of the books I read were medium paced, 45% were fast paced, and only 6% were slow paced. For page number, I mostly read from books between 300 and 500 pages. I read 97% fiction and 3% nonfiction, which is pretty good. I actually read a couple nonfiction this year, and they said my top genres were young adult, contemporary, thriller, fantasy, romance, and mystery. And the authors I read the most from this year were the manga authors, which makes sense. I also managed to read 3 books by Ruth Ware, Sarah J. Maas, and Sabaa Tahir. And my average star rating was 3.83. Then I have these other stats that I keep in a spreadsheet, and according to these stats, where I kind of put it in myself, my top genre was thriller, then fantasy, and then contemporary, followed by romance. In terms of format, it's kind of cool. I read exactly 50% ebooks and 50% physical books. I think this year I want to read a few more physical to get more off of my physical TBR. In terms of audience, I read 49% young adult and then 43% adult, and then the rest were like new adult or middle grade. I read only 25% own voices, so I definitely think that's something that I could work on increasing. And in terms of author race, I read from 62% white authors, 29% Asian, and then only 5% Black and 1.8% Latinx and 0.9% Indigenous, so I could definitely improve that as well. All right, now let's get into the books that I read in December. I managed to read 9 books, and I'm going to talk about them in the order of my least favorite to my favorite as always. So coming in at last place, it's actually funny because I filmed my best and worst books of the year videos, and then my last couple books of the year I gave 5 stars or 2.5 stars, and so they probably could have been included on my best and worst of the year videos, but I had already filmed them, so that's kind of funny. But yeah, this first book is Lovelight Farms by B.K. Borison. This is a romance that a lot of people have been talking about recently, and it was my book club pick for December with my book club, and this was my lowest rated book of the month. Unfortunately, it was 2.5 stars. This is a holiday romance, and it is a friendship to lovers story, which I did think I was gonna like, but unfortunately it was not slow burn enough for me. But anyways, it's about our main character who owns this Christmas tree farm, and it's not doing very well financially. So she enters in this contest to try and win money and promotion for the Christmas tree farm, but on her application she lied and said that she ran the farm with her boyfriend because she just wanted to make the story better, like have this kind of romantic story that went with it, and she just hoped in the meantime that she would get a boyfriend, but she didn't. So she has to ask her best friend, Luca, what was her name? I forget, but she has to ask her male best friend to be her fake boyfriend for this little competition. So he of course agrees because he is secretly pining for her as well, and so they start fake dating, but not for very long. I'm just gonna say they are bumping and grinding and humping very early on in the book. Like, there was not a lot of time before they started being intimate together, and so that was way too quick for me. Even though they had this, friendship for 10 years, so they were comfortable with each other, it was just not, there was not enough tension and build up. They basically got together right away, in my opinion. Even though they were thinking it was casual, they were still basically together. I also just thought reading the fake dating trope with a friends to lovers was kind of weird for me. I feel like normally fake dating, they date someone that's like a stranger, so it's not a big deal when they have to break up. in a few months or however long they're gonna fake date for. But with these people, they were friends. Like, their families knew each other. Like, it was a really big deal for them to like tell their friends and families and this whole little small town that they were dating. Like, these were huge stakes, and everyone was really invested in their relationship. And obviously we know that it's gonna work out in the end, but like, what if it didn't? Like, I just felt like that was a really intense situation to like fake date with someone who's your genuine friend and you know their family. It's not the same as like, you know, when you're fake dating with a random coworker or something. It was just like very uncomfortable for me. Also, I feel like the fun like competition aspect just did not play out. Like, it didn't come in until the very end, and then it wasn't a very big part of the book, and I think that really could have been like a fun aspect that was going on throughout the entire book. I will say there were quite a few steamy scenes, and I actually did like them. I'm pretty picky with my steamy scenes, and the fact that I actually liked them is a good sign, but unfortunately the rest of the book just did not live up to it, which is like surprising for me. I feel like normally it would be the opposite. And then I just thought the main character was really dumb. Like, first of all, the fact that she is like running her business into the ground. Like, I know she's under some like tough circumstances. Like, there is someone who seems to be working against her and like sabotaging her business, but like, I don't think she handled it well. And then also, she literally had Luca like telling her he loved her and she wouldn't believe him until, I don't want to spoil, skip over a few seconds if you don't want a spoiler, but she wouldn't believe him until she saw a TikTok video that someone made about their relationship, and then she's like, oh, he does love me. Like, girl, he told you that and you still wouldn't believe him. Anyways, I had a lot of issues with that book, but moving on. Next up we have Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng. I gave this one 3 stars, and it was included in my reading blog from last month where I read some of Indigo's best books of the year. So if you want to see more of my in-depth thoughts as I read this book and some other ones, definitely go check that one out. But this is sort of a dystopian book about this mother and son's relationship. It's set in a world where this organization has been set in place called PACT, which stands for Protecting American Culture and Values, and basically there's just like a lot of racism against Asian people. And so because of that, our main character Bird has been separated from his mother for years, and he is basically trying to find her after all these years, and we learn more about this world and what his mom has gone through as an Asian American. I feel like Celeste had a good like message and meaning to her book that she wanted to get across. I just don't think it was executed in the best way. I feel like the characters were lacking. I feel like it got boring at times, especially when we were just living through how this sort of pandemic dystopian thing had started. It's kind of like something we've seen before, and I wasn't necessarily super interested. I do think there were some beautiful moments, but at the end of the day, it just was a bit of a flop for me. Then we have Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sulin Tan. I also read that for the same blog. This is an adult fantasy book about the daughter of the moon goddess. What was her name? Xing Lin, I think it was. She has to go on the run because her mother is the moon goddess, and her mother was sentenced to basically be confined to stay on the moon because she stole this elixir that made her immortal, but that was a crime, so she's being punished. So Xing Lin is actually not supposed to be alive, so she has to go on the run, and it's basically this sort of warrior coming of age story a little bit. Like, she has to fend for herself, figure out her powers and her magic and how to fight. She ends up joining an army. She ends up having a star-crossed lover situation, kind of this whole epic fantasy story, while she's also trying to find a way to save her mother from her imprisonment. My biggest issue with this was the first half. I feel like the author was just speeding through all of the events super quick that I couldn't even catch a breath or really like be there with our main character through this, because it was just skipping ahead so much, almost like a movie montage or something. I also found the writing like very like flowery and boring, kind of. Yeah, the writing just wasn't really conducive to like binging it and like reading it quick and like really enjoying it. By the second half, there were definitely more like scenes and moments that were good and that were interesting, and there was some drama, there was some like love triangle, some tea being spilled. Again, just a little bit of a disappointment and a little bit not what I was hoping for. There is going to be a sequel for this book, so I'll probably read that, but I mostly think this was kind of like a standalone story. Then I also read A Million Junes by Emily Henry. I read this for the Buzzwordathon challenge that Books and Lala does. The theme for this month was to read a book with a number in the title, so I went with million. I don't think I'm going to participate in the Buzzwordathon next year. I know Kayla put the themes out, but I think I'm just sort of gonna stick to my own TBR for next year. But I did fully complete the challenge this year, so I'm pretty happy about that. Unfortunately, I was disappointed with this book though as well. I also gave this 3 stars. I have absolutely loved Emily Henry's adult romance books like so many others. They're some of my favorite romances. Unfortunately, this just did not work for me as much as those ones did. If you don't know, this is sort of like a fantasy or magical realism story about this young girl who has recently lost her dad, and it's this really weird thing where like there are these, like, I pictured them as like orbs, like little ghosts, little, I don't even know how to describe them, that are like on her property because there's some weird magic in her family, and like there's a curse between her family and this other family. That's why it was giving like Romeo and Juliet vibes, where basically like they have a feud between them, these two families, and we don't know why, but it's basically like if something bad happens to one family, then something bad happens to the other family, and they're not supposed to interact because of that. So for example, her dad passed away, and at the same time someone from their family passed away at the same time, so it's kind of this weird thing between them. Of course, she ends up getting into a romance with someone from the other family, and the best part was definitely the romantic elements. It's a good choice that Emily Henry went into writing romance books, because she definitely knows how to do that right. The love story was my favorite part of this book, but there was so much other stuff. Like there was so much talk about loss and grief, and it was just really heavy and not really something I enjoyed reading about. So I would just be aware of that. Like, just read it if you want to read a lot about loss and grief, but I don't know if everyone really wants to read about that very much. Yeah, I also just found it a bit boring sometimes, and it just didn't really connect with me, again, as much as I wanted it to. Next up, I also read We Spread by Iain Reid, again for that Indigo reading blog, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. If you don't know, this is the author of I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and that's why I was really intrigued to read this one. There's definitely some similarities between this and that one in terms of his writing style. I do quite enjoy his writing style. It's very like stream of consciousness, kind of weird, kind of different, very quick and easy to read in my opinion, but at the same time it's like a little bit confusing, like you don't know what's happening, if that makes sense. But this one is about this woman whose partner has recently passed away, and she is like an older woman. I'm not sure her exact age, but she is starting to have some memory loss, just some signs of aging, and she ends up being put into this home with a few other seniors. She basically feels like something weird is going on in this place and feels like she can't really trust the people who are running it, but she's a bit of an unreliable narrator as she is older and potentially has experienced Alzheimer's or dementia. It's a pretty short book, pretty straightforward, definitely, as I said, creepy, good atmosphere with the writing, but I just don't think it did enough for me. Again, I feel like it was about a topic I don't personally really connect with, like maybe if you've recently experienced someone go through one of those illnesses or something like that, or maybe if you have a fear of aging, you'll really connect with the story and it will really freak you out. But that's not really something I think about a lot, so I feel like there was a little bit of a disconnect for me with this story, but it was still well written and everything. Next up, we have a 4-star read, and that is A Love on the Brain by Hazelwood. Yes, I did enjoy this romance. I know it's kind of a polarizing book. You either love it or hate it. I really liked it. So if you don't know, this is a romance book by the same author as The Love Hypothesis, and a lot of people say that it's really, really similar, and it is very similar, but I feel like I was still able to enjoy it and enjoy all of those fun tropes that it had. It's about our main character, who I think was named B, and she is a neuroscientist, I want to say, and so she just got this new job at NASA where she's going to be working on these helmets for like the astronauts, and then she finds out she's working with Levi, who was her like arch nemesis back in school. He like used to insult her, and she thought that he hated her and was mean to her, so she instantly hates him back because of that. So they are forced to work together, and so of course it's like an enemies to lovers kind of thing. At first the book was annoying me a little bit just due to some things with the plot, but once we got past that and past all of the miscommunication and we started having those cute moments with the two main characters, I actually really liked it. Of course there's a lot of cringe, which everyone talks about, of Hazelwood's heroines being like super tiny and then the heroes being like super big, and then she just constantly talks about that. And there were definitely some smutty scenes that I didn't totally connect with, but overall I just think her writing is really fun. It's definitely like a lighthearted, silly book, not anything to take too seriously, but as someone who doesn't enjoy that much romance, this was one that I definitely enjoyed and would recommend. Oh, and there also was some like kind of like fun action at the end, which again maybe some people would think was cringe, but I just kind of went with it and thought it was fun. Another book I gave 4 stars and really loved was Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier. This I also read for the Indigo reading blog, and this was my first thriller from this author, and I have to say I really am intrigued to read more from her. I really enjoyed this. If you don't know, it's about this woman who's married to this famous comedian. He's quite a bit older than her, but she walks in to the bathroom one day and he has been murdered, and so then I think she like passes out or something, and so then when people find her, it looks like she is like holding the murder weapon and that she murdered him. So she becomes like the main suspect in his murder, especially as she is, you know, the young wife to this rich guy, so obviously that's very suspicious, like she would inherit his money. So we have that situation going on, trying to, you know, figure out who really killed him. Maybe it is our main character. She's a little bit unreliable. In the meantime, we find out a lot about her history. There's a lot of like interesting reveals. It gets totally crazy, totally dark, like goes places you wouldn't expect, but it was so entertaining to read. I think the only reason it didn't get a full 5 stars is that it wasn't so twisty where like the twists were shocking. It was just kind of like cool reveals that you got throughout, and really good characterization in this one. Definitely trigger warnings for this for like sexual assault and stuff. You guys should definitely be aware of that, but it's definitely a little bit of one of those good for her stories. I really liked it. Then we just have my 5-star reads, which were 2 of my last reads of the year, and I couldn't include them in my favorite books, but I would have if I would have read these earlier. First up, we have Another Note. This is the Los Angeles BB murder cases, and it is a Death Note story. So you guys might know I've been reading the Death Note manga and I have seen the whole anime. This is a little like extra story. I wouldn't call it short story. It is a little bit short, but it's just like a little story that follows the detective L, who is a character in Death Note, and a case that he had before the events of Death Note took place. So a little bit of a prequel. It's really interesting. So we're following Elle and we're following this other detective who again is a character in Death Note, and there is this serial killer going around and he's killing people with the acronyms BB, and he's leaving little hints in each of the crime scene. Like they're all kind of like crime scenes that have riddles hidden in them, and the detectives have to like figure them out. And it's definitely a great book for if you enjoy the series Death Note. It was super easy to read. I think I read in like one day. Super fun, super twisty. The plot twist at the end, I loved it. If you haven't read Death Note, you probably no, you shouldn't pick it up. This is probably just for if you've read Death Note, just because a lot of the references and stuff. But yeah, highly recommend if you read Death Note. And if you haven't read Death Note, then you should read it. But yeah, I gave this 5 stars. And then my favorite book of the month, and probably one of my favorites of the year, was Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. My second Alice Feeney book. I read Rock, Paper, Scissors earlier this year and also gave it 5 stars. Now I read this. I'm giving it 5 stars again. This is also a bit of a polarizing thriller. I feel like a lot of thrillers are, but it has a great plot twist that I can see why some people wouldn't love it. But if you don't know, it has a great, you know, setup and premise that I love, where there's this family called the Darker family, and it's their Nana's birthday. So she calls them all to her little house on this like island to celebrate her birthday that one night. And of course, the tide goes in overnight, so you can't leave until the morning when the tide goes out. So it's an isolated setting of this family like trapped at this house together, and then Nana gets killed. Nana dies, and so then it's like a whodunit situation, and then one by one the other family members are getting killed off and you're trying to figure out who did it. Classic story. I think it is a kind of retelling of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which a lot of people seem to do, and I love it. I really should read the original book, but I think it had a great twist on that. It was so great to like theorize throughout what I thought was going on. This is actually the first book I've ever annotated, because I'm doing this thing with my friend Allie where we annotate a book and give it to each other. I was inspired by Nerdy Nat Reads, and I think some other people do that as well, but it was really fun to, I don't know if you can see, I just mostly wrote in pen and highlighted. You can't really see, but it was really fun to just write in the margins like what I thought was going on throughout it, my theories, underlining things I thought were suspicious, all this kind of stuff like that. I'm really excited for Allie to read this and be able to see all my little comments and for us to discuss it, and we'll see if she liked it as much as I did. There also was some diabetic rep in this, which you may know I enjoy seeing. There's actually quite a bit of diabetic rep in thrillers, and I really enjoyed that. So if you ever read a thriller that has any mention of diabetes, or like insulin is the murder weapon or something, like definitely let me know. And it's called Daisy Darker because our main character's name is Daisy Darker, if I didn't mention that. She is one of the daughters in this family, and so she's kind of the main focus of this mystery. Highly recommend. Alrighty, that's it for my wrap up. Hope you guys enjoyed. Definitely leave me a comment if you have any thoughts on these books, and let me know what your favorite book of 2022 was, or what your last read was. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye! Thanks for watching!